The Carolina Panthers are 1 week into training camp, so let's take a look at where the roster is at as they head into their second week right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where tomorrow on the show, the weekly Friday mailbag is back. So what you need to do right now is either at me or DM me your question about the Carolina Panthers 1 week into training camp. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer that question on tomorrow's show, the weekly Friday mailbag, right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. As I've said, the Panthers are 1 week into camp. They've had 5 practices, 4 in shorts, 1 on Tuesday in pads, and then later on Thursday evening, Fan Fest at Clemson for their 6th practice and their 2nd padded practice of training camp. Then they'll get ready for a week from today. They're going to be right out there in New England for their preseason opener against the Patriots before facing off against the Jets the week after that, and then finishing out the preseason against the Bills and cutting down the roster, and finally the season beginning. So we're almost there. We're not quite there yet, but we are almost there. So on today's show, thinking about it, 1 week in, a decent amount of roster moves have been made. We've looked at how some guys have performed. I want to take inventory of where the Panthers are at 1 week into camp. And I want to do that with my friend, Mike Kaye, the Charlotte Observer. Follow him on Twitter at Mike_E_KAYE, the worst Twitter handle out there in the Charlotte media. Going to talk to Mike, get his perspective, what he's seen, also what I've seen. We're just going to chop it up and talk about the Panthers as we like to do here on the show. So Mike Kaye from the Charlotte Observer coming up right here on Locked On Panthers. All right, back here on Locked On Panthers, and as promised, the venerable sports reporter for the Charlotte Observer, Mike Kaye, joining us here on the show, covers your Carolina Panthers. Follow him on Twitter at Mike_E_KAYE. Still, by far, the worst handle of all of the sports people here in the city of Charlotte. Mike, how you doing this afternoon, buddy?
Well, honestly, after the last week, I kind of feel like my profile handle, to be honest with you. I'm kind of lagging by. My kids and wife are out of town, and everybody is like, yeah, oh cool, I'll get to do all the stuff that I want to do. No, I've been at training camp and I'm exhausted. So it's been a couple of weeks. That's what it's been.
And just to take you guys inside of this, it feels like Mike was beginning to crack on Saturday, which was only day 3 of training camp. And this is a guy who's out there every single day. And the weather's at least been good, Mike. It's not like it's been oppressively hot like it has usually been in the past in Spartanburg. They've gotten lucky not having an indoor facility. That luck will run out one day. It may not be during training camp, but that luck will run out some point in time, I believe, this fall. So at least there's that. You don't have to worry. Well, I guess you did get rained on the other day, so never mind. My bad.
Yeah, I had some pretty soggy socks, which outside of claustrophobia is like my hell. It was not a fun experience, and I think I've been in a bad mood ever since.
No, it's not ideal, but at least the Phillies are good, as every day I get a training camp and there's Phillies talk. It's honestly it's horrible being a Braves fan, having to sit here and listen to people talk about the Phillies every single day, but I wish them nothing but the worst moving forward. Let's talk about the football team and what I brought you here to not talk about baseball, the weather, and your soggy socks. Mm-hmm. Everyone is always asking, how does Bryce Young look so far? And back during OTAs, it's like, okay, he's learning a new offense. is it that big of a deal? Same thing with mandatory minicamp. And really, the first couple of days of training camp, as he's getting reacclimated, they're still not wearing pads. Tuesday was the first day that they actually wore pads. And I saw that Adam Thielen and Bryce had a connection they had last year. I have not spent too much time really focusing on the quarterback, as I'm more concerned about things like, will they block for the quarterback? Will the other side of the ball be able to stop the run and get after the opposing quarterback? Will the guys on the outside be able to catch the football? All the things around the quarterback, what I'd like to focus on. But focusing in on Bryce Young, what have you seen? And what do you think he's done so far as his progression, or how he's done so far as his progression through 1 week of training camp here in Charlotte?
Well, so I wrote the first 3 practices were uneventful, right? He was not bad. He didn't do anything particularly dynamic. But I think as we've gotten into the second week of camp, I think you're seeing how special his accuracy can be, especially from like the 15 to 25 yard range. If I could take you back to last year, during rookie mini camp, he was playing like Bama Bryce, as I call him. He was improvising. He was throwing the ball downfield. And then suddenly in the middle of OTAs, that all kind of just like went away. It was almost like a coaching, quirk. And then during training camp, he didn't throw more than 15 yards in front of him. And then you got into the preseason, and it was like 10 to 15 yards. And then you're like, week 3, you're like, oh, this is what this offense is. This is probably what they're telling him to do, or he doesn't feel comfortable in the pocket. I would say this. He has made probably 4 of the 10 best throws I've seen him make as a Panther in the last 2 days.
Okay.
The thrown individuals to Thielen, the Ian Thomas rainbow the other day, the Deontay Johnson double move in one-on-ones yesterday, and then yesterday's like bucket throw to Johnson. Like those are 4 of probably the 10 best throws he's made in a practice or a game as a Panther. And I think he's starting to get more comfortable. I think he's starting to trust that wide receivers will get open. Jonathan Mingo looks much improved. Terrace Marshall is doing things I've never seen him do. Granted, that was before pads came on.
Yes.
I think there's a rhythm to this. I'm not trying to like hype this up like Bryce Young has arrived, but I am seeing signs that the coaching is working for him. The surrounding cast is starting to work for him. And if that continues to progress into games, that's a very good thing. I think Deontay Johnson's the best route runner he's worked with since Devontae Smith. And so when you have guys who can catch with timing and get open quickly and can create that little bit of space, the throw to you and I were in the end zone at the time, but one of the first reps and individuals yesterday, Deontay Johnson ran a double move on J.C. Horn where he zigged outside and then went in. Yeah. So it was like the timing was perfect. He created maybe this much separation, but that was enough for Bryce to put it over the corner, J.C. Horn, who is very long, and hit Deontay Johnson for just like a dot. Like it was really impressive. And then later on in team drills, as I mentioned, down that right sideline, ooh boy, like if he can make that throw with regularity, this offense is going to work a lot better than last year's, because that was not there last year.
I'm curious about this offense and like Bryce's role. Obviously, he's going to start again. There's going to be a lot expected out of him outside of the building, whether it be the fans or just people observing outside of the city of Charlotte across the rest of the league. I'm just curious. Canales has talked a lot about wanting to run the ball and being stubborn about it. And since every time it seems like we have our offensive lineman, like Robert Hunt comes up, someone asks him about Dave Canales wants to run the football. Austin Corbett comes up on Saturday. They ask him about, hey, they want to run the football. How do you feel about that? I just wonder, how much are they really going to ask of Bryce Young in this offense this year? Of course, when they need to throw the ball, they're going to want him to be successful. I'm just curious, like, how much are they really going to lean on him? Or is it really truly going to be them leaning on the run game more so than asking last year's number 1 overall pick to take that massive leap that I think a lot of people are hoping for and possibly even expecting this season?
Well, I think it's going to be balanced, right? I think when you imply that you want to run the ball, people are like, is it going to be the Steve Wilkes offense? No, I think there's this stigma with like quarterback based or wide receiver based offensive coordinators and play callers, in that when push comes to shove, they're going to be like 60% pass and 40% run. I think ideally you'd like it to be more 55-45. And I think that's what he's trying to imply. Do I think they're going to lean on the running game early? Yes, and they should, especially because this is a new offense.
Yeah.
You've invested so much in Robert Hunt, who's a road grader. You've invested in Damian Lewis, who is a big man. And I think Adam Thielen's athleticism will help get spring leaks, so to speak, in that second level. And so I think, playing to Ike Ikwanu's strengths, he's always been a very good run blocker. I think they're just trying to play to what they have. And listen, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were not very successful running the football last year. That is a fact. But they were stubborn about it enough that like during those last, 6 games, including the playoffs, they were able to kind of hit the ground running, so to speak, and get off to good starts with the ground game. I think that's what Canales wants to replicate, and I think that's to the benefit of the passing offense.
Yeah, and speaking about the Bucs rushing attack, they were dead last in rushing success rate last year in the NFL. The Panthers were at least 17th, and that was a rushing offense that I don't think any of us really thought was even at that level last year, as Miles Sanders struggled, but eventually Chuba Hubbard took over, and he's now running into the USC top running back here in Carolina. Let's take a quick pause. Mike, I want to talk about some of those guys that you mentioned. Terrace Marshall doing things you've never seen him do before. Jonathan Mingo, also him stepping up. What's around Bryce Young? Let's focus in on the wide receiver core and the offense here when we come back in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With Carol last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and your lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets, and it's just not MLB tickets. Preseason football is going on. It's always overpriced, but Gametime can get you a deal. Matter of fact, save with the 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. from Gametime. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. It's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, back here, Locked On Panthers, Julian Council, Mike Kaye of the Charlotte Observer. Talk about the Panthers 1 week into training camp, and let's focus in on the wide receivers for a second. We've seen Jonathan Mingo's probably had, it's not like it was only been his second training camp, but he's had a solid camp so far through 5 days, only one of those being padded. Terrace Marshall, you and I were talking about it the other day, just looks different. When you have the colored visor, the 88, I always felt like is an elite wide receiver number. Terrace Marshall looked pretty good. Now, that was before pads came on. I wasn't out there on Tuesday. You can provide more insight into what he looked like once the pads actually came on. Are you buying into those guys and the improvement? Canales had talked about, I think it had been, it was either Monday or Saturday. He talked about just it takes those guys like 2 or 3 years to really stand out. Now, it's year 4 for Terrace Marshall, year 2 for Jonathan Mingo. So I feel like the expectation for him to get to where you would like him to get to, it would be more reasonable now than where a guy, Terrace Marshall, it gets last chance to at least be here in Carolina on this wide receiver depth chart. Are you buying into what they've done so far? Because I looked at this group and I looked at Thielen, looked at Johnson. Certainly you can have questions about those guys, but they felt like the only 2 sure things, if that's the right word, where everybody else, I didn't really know what to expect as far as like the depth goes and who would be that 3rd or 4th guy.
I think so. You touched on something and like it just like clicked in my brain. I think the buy-in, if you're buying into Mingo being the 3rd wide receiver, yes.
Okay.
Right. Like I think having Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen as, perennial contributors who have done well in the league, you feel better about the baseline. Like last year, they put Mingo in a really rough spot where he really needed to be option number 2. He started 14 games and produced 418 receiving yards with no touchdowns. To put that into perspective, Bryce Young was sacked 62 times for 477 yards. Bryce Young was sacked for more yardage than Jonathan Mingo caught passes for yardage, okay? So I think the bar is low. That said, I feel comfortable saying that Jonathan Mingo has been leaps and bounds the biggest riser in camp because of perspective and what we really saw here. Look, they brought in Deontay Johnson because they knew they needed to upgrade wide receiver. They drafted Xavier Legette because they wanted to upgrade over Mingo. Mm-hmm. Like, there's no way around that. No one has to tell you that. That's logic, right? They have very comparable body types. I wouldn't say they're the same player, but you're saying to yourself, you know, you need that big-bodied receiver who can go up and get it and play to his size. I think Mingo has played to his size in camp. That's extremely important because that is not something that he did. He was a size-speed prospect. When a guy only plays to his speed, when he has big size, that means nothing, in my experience. So you're only using half your tank, right? Like, you're only using half your traits. And I think that's been a problem for Terrace Marshall, who has always had the speed but never played to his size. And for Mingo to avoid being that kind of, oh, man, a coaching staff is going to bail on him again sort of talent, he needs to play to all of his gifts. And I think he has done that so far. To me, he reminds me a lot of Anquan Bolden. I think that's probably his ceiling.
Who was never the fastest guy.
Right. And for what it's worth, Mingo's success in college really came when he moved to the slot. But when you have Adam Thielen in the lineup, you're not going to have him there. They tried to push Mingo as a Z receiver all season long last year. I just didn't think that fit his traits. Well, I think having space off the line helped him. I just think if you're not going to take advantage of your size in a way, it's just you're making this offense extremely slow. You normally want to have a faster player at the Z position. Yeah. But Mingo's playing very well, and I think that's encouraging. Terrace Marshall had like a really good first 2 weeks in Spartanburg last year. And then they put on the pads and he just disappeared and got demoted. And
didn't he have a hamstring injury too?
Yeah, he had an injury. I mean, it was hellishly hot. I only did one Spartanburg summer, and that was enough for me. But look, I think they're off to a good start. I'm not going to crown guys as, oh man, they're back or it's clicked. But I think having a wide receivers coach as your head coach, a wide receivers coach as your offensive coordinator, a former Pro Bowler as your wide receivers coach, I think they've done a really good job of talking to them on their level and really kind of getting the most out of them. I also think having somebody like Deontay Johnson in there where Adam Thielen isn't the only guy who knows how to run routes, I just think that that's really helpful. And so I think there's less pressure on Mingo to be the guy because Johnson's in the room. And I also think, look, you know, when you come to the NFL, you don't know what to expect. He got a full off season. He got to spend some time and bond with Bryce Young. I think that's helpful. I think Mingo's very talented. It's a matter of putting it together.
Yeah, and I love that you bring up the backgrounds of the offensive staff here because I brought that up here on the show as well. Canales played wide receiver in college. Nate Carroll's working wide receivers in Seattle. Brad Idzik played wide receiver in college as well. And, of course, you have your wide receiver coach here in Carolina as well. So to have that many guys of that background was vitally important, especially for some young guys like Mingo who you want to be able to, I don't know, not save, but you want to get him to play his best. And you know you're going to bring somebody in like Legette even before they decided to go draft him in the first round. And then there's still Terrace Marshall. Now, going over to Xavier Legette, because fans are going to see Mingo, he's playing well, and he's running with the threes. And I do like that they're taking a different approach, not just throwing Legette out there, but actually making him earn it. And I believe it was Canales said last week, show us. And then you'll have the opportunity. He also just said he doesn't really have a plan for him. Like when he's ready, we'll get him into the offense. And they did seem to make a concerted effort on Monday, the final day in shorts, to get him the football, especially in some jet sweeps. What are your thoughts just on him so far and what you've seen out of his performance, even only one day of padded practices so far for the Panthers?
Well, I think this offense really wants precise route running, and that was never a strength of Legette's. I think he's probably the most physically talented player on the team, just from a size, speed, ability. But if you want him to thrive down the road, you've got to kind of rev him up, I think. He was a guy that took a lot of time to become successful, and that's an outlier. A lot of people were concerned that, he was a fifth-year wonder. And I think that is
this guy said
look,
that.
I think that is extremely valid. I was very big on Xavier Worthy. I thought he was the guy that made a lot more sense if you wanted to push the ball downfield and really create under for the tight ends and Adam Thielen. I still think Leggett can be a very good player. I don't think anybody should be concerned right now.
Sure.
I think the pads will help him. I said this on another podcast. I think some guys really need the pads in order to thrive. Like, I've seen AJ Brown go from 0 to 100, or more like 75 to 100, putting on pads. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's some guys that just, you know what I mean? Like, you're playing in shorts. Like, it's just like some guys are not workout.
So you're telling me the guys, when they start to play real football, actually look like football players opposed to when they don't have it on?
Right. I think we saw that with the running backs yesterday, in that hearing that pop of the pads, getting that physicality going, kind of brings that out in them. And I think for somebody like Leggett, whose basically style is physical, I think that will help him as he kind of tries to mature into this job. I think a lot of us ran to say, like, he was going to be a surefire starter right away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is a legitimate competition between Mingo and Leggett. Like, I do think that's legitimate. But again, you're going to have to show them. And Mingo has seemed to distance himself a little bit, which is not something I really expected off the jump. So we'll see how they do. Like, when I'm on your show next week or so, that's going to be something to, like, really hash out, right? Like,
yeah.
It's been 5 practices and only 1 in pads. Let's see kind of where they go from here.
Yeah, and I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that Mingo has looked like this, because if you look at it, I've talked to people about this, thinking worst case scenario for this team. This is the last year of Thielen. He's going to be 35 next year. We'll see. But it could be the last year of him. Deontay Johnson, whether he plays well or not, he's a free agent after the season. There's no guarantee he's in Carolina. If Mingo looks like this all season long and has more yardage than Bryce Young has sack yardage this season, which would be successful for both ends. That's not a bad thing heading to next year, where, all right, this is a guy now you can trust, who can then take a even bigger step next year. And then you still have Leggett, and I'm sure they'll probably try to add to that room a year from now. Like, that's not a terrible situation to be in. If you're thinking about, if you want to have sustained success here in Carolina, they got to be able to hit on their draft picks and, yes, make shrewd trades. And I think they made a shrewd trade by bringing in Deontay Johnson for a player that they were going to cut anyways. So to have Mingo work out, have Leggett potentially take a little bit more time, but still be set up to be a guy moving forward. Not the worst case scenario here in Carolina. One quick thing on the receivers before we get out of here. I'm just trying to, or before we take a quick break, just trying to think about, like, the numbers. Thielen, Johnson, Mingo, Leggett, obviously. I would guess Ihmir Smith-Marsette as a punt returner. Are they keeping 6? And if they do, like, does Devin Tompkins factor in, as he's been pretty special teams oriented since he arrived here on Saturday? Or has Marshall done enough? I mean, Coker's a guy a lot of fans like to bring up as well. Like, how do you kind of see that shaking out just through kind of 1 week and projecting through the rest of once preseason starts next week? So
I did my initial 53 before camp started. I had them keeping 5, and that was Thielen, Johnson, Leggett, Mingo, and Ihmir Smith-Marsette. I think Ihmir Smith-Marsette, none of those guys have done anything to hurt their statuses. So I think those 5 guys are pretty, not necessarily locked. I mean, I think the first 4 are definitely locked in. But Ihmir Smith-Marsette hasn't really hurt himself. I think Tompkins does create a bit of a threat just because he is a prolific returner. He does have the history with the coaching staff. And if you cut Ihmir Smith-Marsette, you save $1 million on the cap. So there's that. Talking about Coker, we got the individual drill where he had the catch. Oh, that's right. You weren't there Tuesday. I guess maybe you weren't. All the days are together. Well, because now I was thinking about it, because I would have been talking to you while I was swimming Coker, and I didn't talk to anybody. So there we go. Mike's brain's melting. Excuse me. So Coker had a nice catch on Lamar Jackson, who unfortunately has been on the receiving end of a lot of highlight plays by the wide receivers. He and Deshaun Jameson are just
getting cooked.
Yeah, well, that's what's weird is their coverage hasn't been particularly awful. Like when you say beat them in coverage, they've been there. They're just not stopping the ball from getting there. And I think that that's somewhat concerning. But then again, those are guys that were like bottom of the roster practice squad holdovers. But anyway, Coker needs to kind of make a move here, like because these vets are starting to play very well. I could see them keeping 6 wide receivers if they only go 3 tight ends, but at tight end, they're kind of in a middling thing where Tommy Tremble's got a hamstring injury. Ian Thomas is looking good as a pass catcher. They spent a 4th-round pick. They're not going to cut Jatavian Sanders, who also is kind of taking a little while to get started, which I thoroughly expected.
Yeah, I haven't seen him do anything.
Well, he had one really great catch in one-on-ones where he extended over a linebacker, but really he's a guy who's more of a big slot receiver than a tight end. It's going to take a while for him to it would not shock me if he's inactive the first few weeks of the season. So that's why I think they're going to keep 4 tight ends. And so if you look at the pass catchers as a 10-man group, David Moore's another guy who they really, really like and who's been really good on special teams. And then you got Terrace Marshall. I think the ideal scenario is Terrace Marshall has an awesome preseason and hopefully somebody, rings up Dan Morgan and says, look, you guys need a pass rusher. Let's do a player swap or what. I don't think they're going to get a pick for him no matter how well he plays.
Yeah.
But I think maybe you can use him to better another position. I think Coker's going to have a really tough time making this team as much as, Draft Twitter or Draft X really loves him. I just look at the group and he's going to have a good preseason, man. That's just like the reality of the situation. There's so many pass catchers here. And that's like the thing. Like I wouldn't say anybody's dynamic outside of Deontay Johnson where you're like, oh, wow, this is like the most talented stack group. But I think they have a lot of rosterable talent, which I wouldn't have said last year.
Yeah, and that is certainly an upgrade from obviously what they looked like a year ago. And you brought up something about getting a pass rusher, potentially. They brought in someone last week, and there's still questions about DJ Wonnum and his status. Let's take a quick pause, come back and talk about the edge rusher group here in Carolina in just a moment here on Locked On Panthers. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But with the playoffs over, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But actually, the sports are kind of sportsing right now. Preseason football is back tonight. The Hall of Fame game. Check it out. Go use FanDuel, and you get in on that action. The Olympics going on, Major League Baseball going on, college football. It's almost there. Cannot wait. But FanDuel, whether we have sports going on or not, always lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer does not end until September, folks. FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, back here on Locked On Panthers, Julian Council, Mike Kaye. A couple more questions going to get you out of here, Mike. Talk about the pass rushers right now. You looking at it, first team, Jadeveon Clowney's out there. Caleb Chason has been the other starter on the outside at the edge position, while DJ Wonnum continues to be on PUP. Do you feel like they're concerned at all about his status? Because I don't really get an idea of when he may be back. And they did bring in Kemoko Toure, who the last time he really was around the league having an impact was a couple years ago in Indianapolis. And he hasn't necessarily been in and factored in just yet because he's only been around for 2 days. But do you think they might go back later on and try to bring somebody else? Or how do you think they're kind of going about that with DJ Wonnum still out and not really knowing what the timeline is there?
I don't think they're concerned, but I don't think they're comfortable, if that makes sense. Like,
sure.
This team doesn't seem like a contender. I think winning 6 games would be huge for them. That's 3 times their win total. It's more than Matt Rule ever produced, what have you.
That's what you got to say. I keep telling people, what if they tripled their win total? Now what I got to say is, what if they won more games in a season than Matt Rule ever won in a single season? So there you go.
And I think then, in order to do that, I think Bryce Young would need to step up, right? You'd need to have a true offense. You'd need to be able to stop the run. And frankly, Ejiro Evero's philosophy has always been, this is not lip service. Well, he wants to set the edge more than he wants to get to the quarterback. That is a fact. He trusts his secondary. This is a very secondary-friendly defensive system. And I think what you're seeing is they bring in Ashawn Robinson. They bring in Josie Jewell, who are both much better fits for this system than the guys they replaced. As good as Frankie Levy was, he was not very efficient against the run. Josie Jewell is a pretty good run stopper for the most part. He's more of a natural inside linebacker.
Yeah.
And then, frankly, Jadeveon Clowney is one of the top 2 or 3 run-stopping edge rushers in the entire league. So you've got a good floor there. I don't expect Jadeveon Clowney to be a 9.5 sack guy. In Baltimore, everybody was having career years. That's just the way it was. If he can get 6 sacks, I think they'd be thrilled. Wadham, I think there is a low lingering sense of concern. They did bring in Carl Lawson. They brought in Yannick Ngakoue. From my understanding is the Ngakoue situation is still wide open. He is a guy who is not going to just play for the minimum. He's a guy who does have options. He has worked out for other teams. He is a guy who is very productive as a pass rusher, but at this point in his career, he's more of like a third down specialist.
Yeah, he's terrible against the run, which I think is why he's going to be on his 6th team in 5 years.
Correct. So he's a net negative against the run. Oh, what did I just say about Evero? So like the fit isn't great. That's why they passed on signing him last year, along with the $10 million that he got in Chicago. Like that was not going to happen. I think Lawson, I do not see happening. I do think that they will be looking at the waiver wire. They do have first priority. I do think you could see some player for player trades. Brant Tillis comes from a front office staff that was very smart with the way they did bottom of the roster trades. I do think you'll see some situations pop up in training camp where teams need, wide receivers or what have you, and maybe they can make like a mid-level trade. Now, that said, when you're weighing all these costs, remember they have about like $6 million in salary cap space, and they don't want to touch next year because next year is when, by the way, they've got a ton of money, but they want to be able to spend that on current guys. And they want guys to, grow in the system. Xavier Woods is going to be a free agent. Shaq Thompson's going to be a free agent. Chuba Hubbard, if he has a breakout year, is going to be a free agent.
A lot of guys.
Deontay Johnson. Like, there are going to be guys to pay potentially too. If Eddie Pinheiro has another good year, maybe that's like another big deal to spend, right? And you don't want to kick the can down the road here like they did in previous regimes. So I think pass rush is a very, very, very clear weakness. But I also think, Rome wasn't built in a day. They're not going to be as bad as the division is, I don't see them.
Is that a David Tepper quote? Rome wasn't built in a day? That's where
I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure that quote has lasted since Rome. But whatever.
That's what he told people when he fired Ron Rivera, and here we are sitting talking about how bad this team is and how bad the pass rush is. 2 things can be true. 2 things can be true. Rome wasn't built in the day, and the Carolina Panthers didn't suddenly become contenders after firing Ron Rivera. They suddenly became one of the worst franchises in the NFL, which they weren't for their first 25 seasons.
No question. Come to Carolina, they said. Cover football, they said to me. No, I hear you, man. Like it's snowballed here quite quickly, and I think Dan Morgan took a pretty reasonable approach this year. I think Brent Tillis is a very smart guy with the way he is structured contracts. I think they are handling the salary cap very smartly. Mm-hmm. But this team has gone through years and years of basically eroding, and they're not talented. They're not this, like, I hate to be like the wet blanket, but last year I had them going 8-9, and I turned that in pretty early in the summer. And I've said this before, every week of training camp, I kind of dropped them a win in my head, and still that wasn't enough. I look.
I was right there with you, buddy. I thought they might win 8 games last year.
This is going to be a grind, and this schedule, just despite them being terrible last year, is not particularly easy either. They travel quite a bit. Germany is going to be a big game for them because I think the Giants might actually have a worse roster, but they're traveling, so you never know. They're traveling to Europe. Anyway, back to the pass rushers. They're not good. It's just not a good group.
Well, here's the thing. It's just their pass rush is going to be bad again this season. Right. I think when you swap out Burns of Clowney, you get better against the run. Mm-hmm. Sure, it's possible that Jadeveon has another 9-sack season. I think it's highly unlikely that's going to happen, but it's possible. And in the long term, you're missing out on a guy who's already been a good pass rusher, may not have had the season that fans would have liked to have seen, but, there's reasons why that didn't happen. He's going to be one of the better pass rushers in the NFL moving forward for the next 4 or 5 years. You traded that away, not paying him, to bring in a guy who can help you out, probably fits what the DC wants to do more this year, but the DC is not going to be here long term, likely. So it's going to be a bad pass rush. And adding somebody, it will make people feel, I guess, better, but it's not going to change the fact that this pass rush is going to be bad again. And that's going to then limit what this defense can do, because he may, being a Jero Vero, he may be confident in his secondary. I'm not so quite sure he should be confident in his secondary, because I see some weaknesses there. Like DiCaprio Boodle is your third outside corner. He's looked fine so far in camp. I mean, he's looked pretty good, but that's not the best situation. And you could even argue the guy who's starting right now, Dane Jackson, really is or should be your third outside corner. That's just my thoughts on the situation. But yeah, the pass rush is not going to be good, and we'll see whenever DJ Woonem comes back. Rashad Penny retired. That shouldn't surprise anybody. You brought it up to me the other day. He was wildly out of shape, and I never felt like he was going to make the team anyways. So hopefully not hopefully, but best of luck to him. Was definitely the right decision. One last thing, and I don't know how important it is, but Sam Franklin's out for the foreseeable future. The expectation he'll come back at some point in time. I'm just curious, how does that change things? Looking just at the back of the roster, special teams wise, I know Canales brought up Chairless and Tay Davis and Chandler Wooten. Is Jamie Robinson a guy who potentially benefits from this, as he was a special teams guy last year who I literally forgot was on the roster so many times, and heading into camp, he felt like he would be the odd man out, as Alex Cook is clearly a Jero Vero favorite from last year as he came in off of the Giants practice squad and started some games. So how do you kind of think that maybe ends up working out with Franklin likely starting his season out on PUP?
So I think from a replacing Sam Franklin standpoint, I think Nick Scott will be now the ace of the special teams unit. They really like him. He's got a lot of trust from the defense and special teams folks. Yeah, I would say Jamie Robinson, I think it's a good sign that he is now working with the nickel group, because last year he was with the nickel group and that quickly went away after the preseason when they realized probably better off not covering anyone. Mm-hmm. I think he's looked okay during the summer. He is more kind of a feisty special teams sort of dude. They really do like Alex Cook. Alex Cook's a good player.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a stacked safety group. And I do think, again, we talked about tight ends and wide receivers being a 10-man group. I think if you look at DB as a 10-man group, you say to yourself, J.C. Horn, Dane Jackson, Troy Hill, who, by the way, has played very, very well.
Yeah.
I think Dane's played well, relatively. I think the problem, to sidetrack, I think the problem with corner right now is not Dane Jackson's talent or Troy Hill's talent. It's the fact that under the surface, there is, like Jaws, the history of J.C. Horn, where he has played 22 of 51 games, and you are one likely injury, soft tissue injury away from Dane Jackson, who's probably a 2B level talent, being your number one. So a 2B starter, like a C.J. Henderson type, starting as the number one corner, and then elevating the nickel corner, Troy Hill, who's a really good fit for nickel, not really for outside, being your number two, And then you've got Shaw Smith-Wade at nickel, who, by the way, is learning the position. It's just that's the contingency plan is what the problem is.
They need another guy. That's exactly what that.
Right.
Exactly.
I think on the nose, like if taking out his injury history, I think J.C. Horn, Dane Jackson, Troy Hill, DiCaprio Boodle, shouts to Shutter Island, if you know, you know. And either Deshaun Jameson or Shaw Smith-Wade. So that would be the 5. And then I think Deshaun Jameson has a shot of being that 6th dude. And then you look at safety, you've got Jordan Fuller, who they really like and who has a connection with the staff. Xavier Woods is the most underrated player on the entire roster. He was phenomenal last year.
Yeah.
Take away interception numbers, he's been phenomenal for 2 years. I think he's a top 10 zone safety in the league. Nick Scott will be that 3rd safety. Alex Cook is going to be kind of like that main backup sort of guy. Nick Scott struggled pretty mightily last year when he was asked to play like a full-time safety role. I don't think he'd be like the first guy to be.
I mean, Pro Football Focus, for whatever you think of them, had him as the worst safety in the league.
Yeah, he's going to be more of like a big nickel. I don't think they want him playing one of the 2 main safety spots, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then I think, you look at Jamie Robinson. I think he's competing there. They like Damani Richardson. That's a name I can give you. Okay. He's played relatively well on special teams. He's an interesting player. I haven't really seen a ton from him, but I know that was a guy that they seem to like.
He did make a nice play one of these days. I do recall seeing that. I was like, oh, who's
they all blur together. Don't blame me.
I mean, I look at my roster cards like, oh, Damani Richardson. I remember him from A&M. Yeah, so let's just see. Yeah, they're all playing together, but good stuff there. We always go so long when we get together, which is fine because it's a lot of good stuff for people. They can walk around their house, their yard, wherever, just not walking the street. Like, pay attention where you're going when you're listening to the show or watching the show. But I appreciate you as always, Mike. And I guess, I'm trying to look. I guess I'll be out there again. I'm not going to Clemson, but I'll see you probably Monday or something like that, whenever I can make it out. But thank you for your time. As always, Mike Kaye, the Charlotte Observer. Follow him on Twitter at Mike_E_KAYE. And of course, subscribe to your local paper if you can. Well, I won't say it, but if you can afford it, you can subscribe to your local paper. But he does a great job. Him and Alex Zeitlow. Scott Fowler, who's been around forever. Langston Wirtz does some stuff there too. Rod Boone, if you want to focus in on the terrible basketball team that we have here, unfortunately, in our city, go check it out and check him out on Twitter. Mike. I was about to call you like Michael for a second. Mike, thank you so much for your time.
It's always a pleasure, Julian. Always a pleasure. Thanks, JC.
People have called me that. All right. I'll wrap up the show in here in just a moment.
Oh, we're melting down here.
Always a fun time. Anytime me and Mike Kaye get together. Also a very long time. Sorry to the bosses at Locked On for going over the 30 minutes yet again when having Mike on. But Mike rambles, I ramble, and we have a nice time. And I hope you guys enjoy watching the show and listening to the show. I know there's a little bit of a lag there at points of time, but just close your eyes and pretend like you didn't see it and just listen to what's being said anyways, because that's all that really matters. So appreciate everybody here tuning into the show. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe, follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And right now, at me or DM me on Twitter at Julian Council and give me your mailbag question, because I'm recording the mailbag on Thursday, as if you're listening to this on Thursday. But get it to me right now, okay? Get me your mailbag questions so I can do the mailbag show and we can all be happy and enjoy our weekends. All right, but in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. And of course, I'll talk to you on Friday where you're going to send me mailbag questions to answer.